Welcome to True Echo, where real courage, quiet strength, and untold heroism echo louder than injustice. Today's story is one that will leave you stunned, inspired, and standing a little taller. It's about a young black teacher who walked into one of the toughest schools in town, and walked out with every student behind her. But what no one knew was the black belt she carried, in more ways than one. The air was crisp that morning, the kind that sharpened the senses and hinted at change. Alicia Carter stepped out of her small silver sedan, her polished shoes clicking against the concrete of Jefferson High's parking lot. With one hand gripping the worn leather strap of her satchel and the other brushing a stray curl behind her ear, she looked like any other new teacher. Fresh-faced. Hopeful. Unaware of the school's dark undercurrent. But Alicia was anything but ordinary. 28 years old and recently relocated from Chicago, Alicia had the kind of presence that made people pause. Maybe it was her calm, composed expression or the quiet power behind her eyes. Dressed in a fitted navy blazer, hair swept into a neat bun, she radiated confidence, controlled and measured. Not arrogance. But something steadier. Grounded. Inside her satchel were carefully prepared lesson plans. She'd spent nights revising her syllabus, dreaming about sparking curiosity in her students. She wanted them to read more than just novels, she wanted them to see themselves in stories, to question, reflect, and grow. What she didn't know, what no one warned her about, was that Jefferson High had a history. And it wasn't written on its shining banners or etched into its sports trophies. It was whispered in hallways and carved in the broken spirits of teachers who had come before her. Teachers who left quietly. Defeated. But Alicia Carter was made of different stuff. As she entered the main corridor, the smell of industrial cleaner and old books greeted her. Students clustered in groups, eyeing the new face walking with purpose down the hall. Some whispered. Others smirked. Alicia smiled at them all, warm and undeterred. Room 237. Her classroom. Sunlight poured through large windows onto rows of desks she'd arranged in a welcoming semicircle. A tiny potted plant on the sill added a touch of life to the otherwise dull walls. Alicia stood by the door as the bell rang, greeting each student with a firm handshake and an intentional, "Good morning, I'm Miss Carter." Then they walked in. Jake Matthews. Dylan Brooks. Ethan Lee. Every school had its bullies, but Jefferson's trio were legends. Jake, the charming prince of privilege, all swagger and cold eyes. Dylan, the muscle, hulking, scowling, and always ready to intimidate. And Ethan, quiet, scholarly, and by far the most dangerous. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His whispers destroyed more reputations than any fist ever could. As the last bell rang, Alicia stepped to the front. Silence fell, not out of respect, but curiosity. Would she stammer? Would she beg for control like the others had? Instead, she smiled gently and began. "My name is Miss Carter. I'm here to teach you English. But more importantly, I'm here to help you find your voice." For a second, a strange calm filled the room. Until Jake leaned back in his chair and, loud enough for everyone to hear, said with a mock sigh, "Let's see how long this one lasts." Chuckles rippled through the back row. Alicia's smile didn't fade. She looked directly at him. "Thank you for your input, Jake. Now let's begin." She turned to the board and started the day's lesson. What no one in that room knew, what Jake, Dylan, and Ethan couldn't begin to imagine, was that Alicia Carter had spent 15 years training in martial arts. She was a third-degree black belt in karate. Every blow she had taken growing up on the rough streets of Englewood had hardened her resolve. Every failure in the dojo taught her not to flinch, not to fold, not to fear. She had learned to move without panic. Speak without shouting. Defend without destroying. And now, her greatest test wasn't a competition mat. It was a classroom full of teens, staring her down, daring her to break. But Alicia Carter? She didn't break. By the second week at Jefferson High, the game had begun in earnest. The trio had graduated from harmless pranks to a more sinister strategy. Someone tampered with Alicia's lesson slides, swapping them out for humiliating internet memes before class. Her carefully prepared materials, gone. The smartboard glitched. Her locker door jammed shut with chewing gum. All of it designed to rattle her. But Alicia remained composed. Unbothered. She simply pulled out a dry erase marker and taught the old-fashioned way. Her voice, calm and steady, soon became a strange presence in a school so used to chaos. Jake hated it. The more Alicia refused to react, the more infuriating she became. His friends noticed it too. One afternoon in the hallway, Dylan muttered, "She doesn't crack. Not even a twitch." Ethan adjusted his glasses and replied, "Everyone has a limit. We just haven't found hers yet." That same day, Alicia found her car keyed down both sides. The damage was deep, deliberate, unmistakable. She stared at it for a long moment, lips pressed into a thin line. Then she took out her phone, snapped photos, and walked inside without a word. It wasn't fear that kept her quiet. It was strategy. She knew these weren't just rebellious teens. They were used to getting away with everything. Jake's father, Richard Matthews, owned half the businesses within a 10-mile radius, including the company that funded the school's new science wing. Dylan's uncle sat on the school board. Ethan's parents were celebrated attorneys with alumni plaques outside the very library he studied in. Alicia wasn't just fighting boys. She was facing a system built to protect them. Still, she taught with fire. During a lesson on To Kill a Mockingbird, she leaned into the novel's themes: justice, power, silence, courage. She didn't point fingers. She didn't name names. But her students heard her message loud and clear. Especially Jake. By then, his friends had begun losing interest in mere disruption. Dylan wanted confrontation. Ethan wanted control. Jake. He wanted Alicia humiliated. Publicly. Irreversibly. The trio launched a new wave of attacks: coordinated online bullying. Fake screenshots. A bogus social media profile with Alicia's name began circulating. It posted edited photos, salacious rumors, and false claims about her time in Chicago. The comments section filled with whispers. Students looked at her differently in the halls. Even a few teachers avoided her in the break room. One morning, the principal called Alicia in. He didn't accuse. He didn't scold. But his eyes carried doubt. "I'm not saying you've done anything wrong, Miss Carter," he began, steepling his fingers. "But there's chatter about your past. About legal trouble in Chicago." Alicia raised her chin. "My record is clean. You're welcome to verify that." He nodded. "We're not judging, just keeping things under control." That phrase lingered with Alicia all day: keeping things under control, not seeking truth, not protecting teachers. Control. Image. Reputation. Alicia realized something then: no one was coming to save her. If change was going to happen, it would have to start with her, and it would take more than just resilience. That night, she stayed up until 2 a.m. cataloging everything. She created a digital file with timestamps, screenshots, email trails, and photos of the vandalism. Every incident. Every whispered attack. Every shadow of manipulation. Piece by piece, she was building a case. But it wasn't just for herself. It was for every student who had flinched when Jake passed by. Every teacher who had left Jefferson High in tears. Every overlooked victim of subtle violence and polished lies. On Friday, as Alicia entered her classroom, she found a small note folded on her desk. A single line was scrawled across it in faint pencil. "They did the same to Ms. Hill. You're not alone." A flicker of something stirred inside her. Not fear. Not even relief. It was fire. Alicia tucked the note into her satchel and turned to the board. Her students were shuffling in, taking their seats. Jake arrived last, smug as ever. He leaned back in his chair and tossed a crumpled paper ball toward the waste bin, and missed. "Still working on my aim," he said, loud enough for laughs. Alicia smiled, unbothered. "You'll get there. Growth takes time." The class chuckled softly. Jake blinked. For the first time, she wasn't just defending herself. She was teaching through the attacks, turning each moment of cruelty into a lesson in grace, control, and dignity. But Alicia knew the storm wasn't over. Jake and his crew hadn't escalated to this level just to walk away. And somewhere behind the arrogance, Alicia sensed a desperation in Jake's behavior. A fear of losing control. A fear of losing power. And that made him more dangerous than ever. The tension at Jefferson High was no longer a whisper, it was a hum beneath every hallway conversation, every cafeteria glance. Alicia Carter had refused to break, and now the student body was beginning to sense something they'd never seen before, someone who didn't flinch, didn't beg, and didn't hide. Jake, Dylan, and Ethan felt it too, and it made them restless. The trio had never met resistance that endured this long. Alicia's refusal to react was not only unsettling, it was undermining their power. So they took it public. The next week, Alicia scheduled presentations from her students on overcoming personal challenges. It was meant to be a moment of inspiration, a window for growth and empathy. Maria Gonzalez, a soft-spoken girl from Mexico who barely raised her voice in class, was the first to volunteer. Alicia had worked with her one-on-one for weeks to build her confidence. This was her moment. Maria stood at the front of the class, hands trembling slightly, holding her cue cards. Alicia gave her a small nod of encouragement. Maria inhaled and began. "I came to the US 3 years ago," she said in a soft accent. "At first, I didn't speak any English. People laughed when I tried. I wanted to give up." A sudden laugh cut through the classroom. "Come on," Jake sneered from the back, arms folded. "Who cares about some boring immigrant sob story?" The room froze. Maria's face went red, her lips quivering. She lowered her cards. Dylan added with a fake yawn, "Let's get to the part where she cries." Alicia's entire body tensed. She stepped forward, placing herself between Maria and the boys. "Enough," she said, voice low but firm. "This is a classroom. Not a stage for mockery." Jake stood up slowly, smug and towering. "What are you going to do, Miss Carter? Suspend me? You think anyone around here can touch me?" Dylan rose next to him. Ethan followed, calm and cold. It was 3 against 1, again. The classroom held its breath. Several students looked at the door, others down at their desks. Then, with measured control, Alicia said clearly, "Jake. Dylan. Ethan. Sit down." Jake knocked a pile of papers from her desk. "Make us." That was all she needed. In a blur of practiced movement, Alicia sidestepped, caught Jake's wrist, and redirected his force with a smooth twist. He stumbled forward, landing against a desk with a stunned grunt. Dylan lunged, only to be locked by the arm and drop to one knee before he could even blink. Ethan, ever the tactician, moved cautiously. But Alicia anticipated him. A pivot. A block. A controlled redirection. He stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. No punches. No pain. Only perfect control. Alicia stood tall, unwavering. The room was dead silent. She looked at the stunned students and then back at her would-be attackers. "I never wanted to use this," she said, "but you've crossed every line." Maria, still trembling, watched Alicia with wide eyes filled with awe. Alicia turned to her and said gently, "Please, continue. Your story matters." With a shaky breath, Maria nodded and began again, her voice steadier, her eyes brighter. As she spoke, something shifted in the room. Students leaned in, truly listening. And for the first time, Alicia saw the tide beginning to turn. When class ended, Jessica Parker, long teased about her weight, stood up and spoke. "I've had enough too. Jake and his friends have made my life miserable for years." Jake moved to interrupt, but this time, Dylan held him back. The confidence was beginning to crack. One by one, students rose and shared what they'd endured: threats, sabotage, cruel rumors. Marcus Johnson, quiet and often overlooked, stepped forward. "They framed Mr. Anderson. Said he planted drugs in someone's locker. I saw what really happened. And I have proof." He pulled out his phone. The class stared in shock. Even Alicia wasn't expecting this. Jake's face went pale. Ethan looked to the door. Dylan's fists clenched, but no one moved to follow him. Alicia, composed but firm, stepped forward. "Marcus, Jessica, thank you. We'll take this to the principal. And the police if we must." Jake laughed bitterly. "My father will bury this. You don't know who you're dealing with." But he was wrong. Alicia did know. And this time, she wasn't alone. By the time the principal arrived, alerted by the students themselves, the entire class stood behind Alicia. What had once been a silent war was now a revolution, and Jake Matthews had just been dethroned. The principal's expression darkened as Alicia handed him her file. "Everything's here," she said. "The vandalism. The lies. The violence. Witnesses. Evidence." For a moment, the room was still. Then the principal turned to Jake, Dylan, and Ethan. "My office. Now." The three boys filed out, heads low. No swagger. No smirks. Just silence. An eerie quiet settled over Jefferson High that afternoon, like the eye of a storm. Students walked the halls whispering, buzzing with the events that had unfolded in room 237. Alicia Carter, the calm new English teacher, had not only stood her ground, she dismantled the school's most feared bullies with dignity, poise, and martial discipline. And now, the once untouchable Jake Matthews had been sent to the principal's office, flanked by his stunned lieutenants. But Alicia knew it wasn't over. Jake's father, Richard Matthews, wasn't just a powerful man, he was the kind of man who made things vanish with a phone call. Alicia had done her homework. Richard had bailed Jake out of more than one police encounter, paid hush money, made threats behind closed doors. His influence loomed like a shadow over the school. And just as she feared, that shadow soon returned. Less than an hour after the incident, a sleek black BMW rolled up to the school's front steps. Out stepped Richard Matthews in a tailored charcoal suit, his face tight with fury. His mere presence sent a ripple through the staff office. Alicia was summoned almost immediately. Inside the principal's office, Richard sat across from the principal, his hands steepled, his jaw tight. Jake sat beside him, head down, expression hollow. When Alicia entered, Richard's eyes locked on her. "You must be Miss Carter," he said, his voice smooth and dangerous. "I've heard quite a bit about you." Alicia nodded calmly. "And I'm sure I'll hear quite a bit about you." He chuckled without humor. "Clever. But not helpful. You humiliated my son in front of an entire classroom. That kind of disrespect comes with consequences." The principal shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Matthews, please, let's remain civil." Richard leaned forward, voice now sharp. "I don't want civility. I want action. If this school doesn't fire her immediately, I will sue every board member here and ensure your next fundraiser dries up overnight." Alicia remained silent. Then she opened her laptop and turned it toward Richard. Videos. Screenshots. Audio clips. Messages. Statements from students. Everything. She spoke clearly. This is what your son has been doing. Alongside Dylan Brooks and Ethan Lee. And I have more. Much more. Richard's face faltered. The principal adjusted his tie, now bolder. I've reviewed the evidence. It's thorough. And damning. Jake didn't speak. His earlier arrogance had faded into something far more unfamiliar, shame. Richard looked between his son and Alicia, and for the first time, a sliver of uncertainty cracked his expression. Jake, he said quietly, is this true? Jake swallowed hard. Yes. All of it. The room went still. Richard slumped back in his chair. His son's words were like a knife, cutting through years of denial and protection. He had built a castle of power around Jake, and now it was crumbling. Alicia leaned forward slightly. Mr. Matthews, I'm not here to destroy Jake. I'm here to help make things right. But that means accountability. The principal nodded. We're prepared to suspend Jake, Dylan, and Ethan. They will attend counseling, perform community service, and write formal apologies to every student and teacher they've harmed. Richard looked down. Then, softly, he spoke. I accept your terms. The room exhaled. Later that evening, Alicia sat in her classroom alone, the golden sunset pouring through the windows. Her body was exhausted, but her spirit was steady. There had been no cheering. No applause. Just the quiet relief of truth finally rising. But the true victory, she knew, wasn't just in what Jake had admitted. It was in the way her students had stood. Jessica. Marcus. Maria. One by one, they had found their voices, and in doing so, reminded Alicia why she became a teacher in the first place. Not to lecture. Not to discipline. But to empower. The next morning, Jefferson High announced the official decision. Jake Matthews, Dylan Brooks, and Ethan Lee were suspended for a month. Each would attend therapy, complete supervised community service, and issue formal, written apologies. The school buzzed with shock. Some parents complained. Others cheered. But among the students, a silent revolution had begun. Respect wasn't demanded anymore. It was earned. That week, Alicia proposed a new initiative, the Self-Defense and Empowerment Club, a safe space for students to not only learn martial arts but to gain the mental resilience needed to stand tall in the face of intimidation. It was approved unanimously. On Thursday afternoon, Alicia stood in the gym, watching a small but eager group filter in, Jessica. Marcus. Maria. Others who had once sat in silence now stood with open eyes, ready to reclaim their strength. Welcome, Alicia said with a warm smile. Let's begin. The gym echoed with the soft thuds of sneakers against polished wood, the sharp snap of movement, and the quiet focus of breath being controlled, not out of fear, but discipline. Alicia Carter stood at the front of Jefferson High's first-ever self-defense and empowerment club, her movements fluid and precise as she demonstrated the next technique. Around her, a dozen students mirrored her steps, awkward at first, but growing more confident with each try. Among them stood Jessica Parker, her stance firm. Marcus Johnson, eyes locked in concentration. Even Maria Gonzalez, whose voice had once trembled before a classroom, now moved with grace and poise. This wasn't just about physical strength. It was transformation. From within. Each student here had a reason. Each had a past. Each had scars, some visible, many not. Alicia knew those scars intimately. As she guided them through blocks, breath control, and situational awareness, her voice was steady but soft. Strength isn't about hurting someone. It's about knowing you could, but choosing not to. Jessica nodded with quiet pride. A week ago, she wouldn't speak above a whisper. Now, she volunteered to lead stretches. Marcus had once hidden in the back of every room. Now he stepped forward to demonstrate a counterbalance move. Maria smiled more easily. She didn't shrink anymore when she walked down the hall. Word of the club spread quickly. More students joined. Even a few skeptical teachers stopped by to watch. They didn't say much. But the look in their eyes said everything: respect. But not everyone was watching from the sidelines. Jake Matthews had returned to school. He came back not with fanfare, but with silence. No entourage. No smug grin. Just a plain backpack and a face that no longer wore the armor of privilege. He didn't speak much in class. He kept his eyes down. And when he saw Alicia in the hallways, he didn't smirk or scoff, he nodded. One afternoon, after school, Alicia was tidying the gym mats when she heard hesitant footsteps. Jake stood in the doorway. "Miss Carter," he said quietly, not quite meeting her eyes. "Can I talk to you?" Alicia paused. "Of course." He stepped inside, took a deep breath, and said, "I want to apologize. Not just for that day in class. But for everything. The lies. The rumors. The bullying. All of it." Alicia nodded, letting the silence settle. "I didn't come here to make excuses," he continued. "I used to think that being powerful meant never having to say sorry. But now I know power means owning your mistakes. You taught me that. Even when I gave you every reason to quit, you didn't." Alicia folded her arms, her expression gentle but firm. "Words are a start, Jake. But change takes time. And work." He nodded solemnly. "I know. That's why I want to help. However I can." She studied him for a moment, reading the sincerity in his voice. Then she gestured toward the bulletin board beside the gym doors. A flyer for Jefferson's new anti-bullying initiative was pinned there. "You want to help," she said. "Join that. Speak up. Share your story. Help us make sure no one else ever feels as powerless as you once made them feel." Jake hesitated, then stepped forward and pulled one of the flyers down. "I will." A week later, he stood at the front of the auditorium during the school's morning assembly. The microphone trembled slightly in his hand, but his voice rang clear. "My name is Jake Matthews," he began, "and I used to be the problem." Gasps echoed across the room. Students leaned in. "I bullied people. I spread rumors. I thought my family name protected me. But I was wrong." He turned slightly toward Alicia, sitting quietly in the front row. "One teacher changed all that. Not by fighting back, but by showing what real strength looks like. I want to be better. And I want to help you be better, too." The room broke into applause, not just polite, but heartfelt. Even Dylan Brooks and Ethan Lee, sitting off stage, looked visibly shaken. Later, Dylan walked into Alicia's classroom and handed her a folder. Inside were pages. Dozens of them. Stories. His stories. "I've been writing," he mumbled. "Figured I should do something real with all this mess in my head." Alicia flipped through the first few pages. Honest. Raw. Full of pain, but also insight. "Dylan," she said softly, this is powerful." He shrugged. "I didn't know who else to show." She smiled. "Let's find a place for it in the school paper." Bit by bit, the bullies were becoming builders. The tide at Jefferson High had fully turned. Where fear once thrived, a new atmosphere was taking root: accountability, healing, and self-respect. And at the heart of it all stood Alicia Carter, no longer just the new English teacher, but a quiet force that had reshaped the culture of an entire school. Every Thursday afternoon, the gym buzzed with the now thriving self-defense and empowerment club. What began as a dozen nervous students had blossomed into a weekly gathering of over 50. Students from all walks of life, shy, outspoken, bullied, and recovering bullies alike, stood side by side on the mat, learning not just to block a punch but to defend their dignity, their voice, and their space. Jessica Parker, once the target of cruel taunts, now stood confidently at the front of the class, leading warm-ups and drills. Marcus Johnson, no longer hiding at the edges of rooms, had become one of Alicia's most reliable student mentors, encouraging younger students to speak up, to trust themselves. Maria Gonzalez, whose trembling hands once dropped cue cards mid-sentence, had started mentoring new immigrant students, guiding them through the fears she had once faced alone. Even more shocking, Ethan Lee had joined the debate team. After long, intensive therapy sessions, something had changed in him. He now stood before packed classrooms, using his sharp intellect not for manipulation, but for measured argument and thoughtful persuasion. His first competition speech topic: the consequences of silence, why standing up matters. He won. That afternoon, Ethan approached Alicia after school, waiting quietly as she locked her classroom door. "Miss Carter," he began, his voice unusually tentative. "I don't expect forgiveness. But I want to thank you. For not exposing me when you could have. For giving me time to realize what I was becoming." Alicia studied him for a moment. "What you were," she gently corrected. "You're not that boy anymore." His eyes glistened, and for the first time, he didn't hide behind logic or sarcasm. "I've got a long way to go." "We all do," she said. "But you're walking the right road now." And then there was Jake. He had become a symbol of unexpected transformation, something even he hadn't anticipated. Each week, he held small group sessions with students affected by bullying. He admitted his past wrongs without excuse and invited open discussion. Some doubted him at first. Many still did. But Jake didn't falter. He showed up. Every day. He volunteered for school events. He apologized in person to every student he had wronged, including teachers. He worked long hours after school cleaning graffiti, organizing books in the library, restocking supplies. And slowly, his sincerity began to sink in. One afternoon, during an anti-bullying seminar, Jake stood at the podium, hands steady, voice clear. "I don't deserve anyone's forgiveness," he said plainly. "But I'm here to earn your trust. I don't want to be remembered as the guy who ruled by fear. I want to be remembered as someone who finally learned what respect really means." The auditorium fell silent. Then, applause. Long earnest. Students rising from their seats, not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. Even a few teachers wiped their eyes. Alicia sat quietly in the front row, watching the boy who once mocked her become the young man trying to redeem himself. Later that week, Dylan walked into Alicia's class with a fresh stack of printed pages. "Volume 2, he said, grinning awkwardly. "Got a title this time, Learning Not to Swing." Alicia smiled and flipped to the first page. "Let's see if the school paper has room for a regular column." Meanwhile, Ethan helped form Jefferson High's first official peer mediation team, students helping students resolve conflict through discussion and empathy, not threats or rumors. The halls that once echoed with whispered cruelty now pulsed with conversation, laughter, and the soft rhythm of growth. Alicia never sought recognition. But the faculty noticed. And one morning, during a school assembly, the principal stepped to the podium with an envelope in hand. "Every so often," he said, "someone comes along and reminds us what education is truly about, not textbooks or test scores, but transformation. Today, we honor that person." He called Alicia to the stage. She walked slowly, surprised, as the students burst into applause, real, thunderous applause. The principal opened the envelope. With unanimous approval from the school board, the Jefferson High faculty, and the district office, it is our honor to announce that Miss Alicia Carter is this year's Teacher of the Year. Alicia stood there, stunned. Her eyes scanned the crowd, Jessica beaming, Marcus clapping furiously, Maria covering her mouth with joy, Ethan nodding proudly, and Jake, eyes glistening with emotion, hands forming the loudest applause of all. She stepped to the mic. "I didn't come here to fight bullies," she said, voice cracking slightly. I came to teach English. But I stayed to fight for hope. For strength. For the power that lies in every single one of you when you choose to stand up, not for yourself, but for someone else. The room rose to its feet. And in that moment, Alicia Carter knew, she hadn't just helped a school survive. She had helped it transform. Months had passed since Alicia Carter first walked into Jefferson High with a lesson plan in her tote bag and quiet fire in her chest. What began as a storm, a confrontation with entitled bullies, a near dismissal by a powerful parent, and the weight of being a lone voice against a culture of silence, had become a movement. The school wasn't perfect now. No place ever was. But something fundamental had shifted. Respect wasn't just a word on a banner. It was lived. Felt. Fought for. The Self-Defense and Empowerment Club had grown so large, it moved from the gym to the auditorium. Every Thursday, over 80 students filled the space, stretching, breathing, learning, and growing. The sessions weren't just about physical movement anymore. They had become workshops in confidence, identity, and accountability. Alicia watched as the students she once worried over now taught each other. Jessica taught younger girls how to protect their boundaries and voices, using her own story as the fuel. Marcus ran warm-ups and introduced breathing exercises, guiding students with calm authority and a patient smile. Maria translated for new students, immigrants, exchange kids, and those who didn't speak English fluently, ensuring no one was left out again. Dylan's writing was now published monthly in the school paper. His stories, once buried under layers of guilt and defensiveness, had become a platform for healing, for himself and for others. His latest piece, Fists and Regret, a former bully's letter to his victims. It went viral on social media. And Jake? Jake Matthews had become the school's unofficial student advocate. He didn't ask for the role. He earned it. When a freshman was cornered in the bathroom by older boys, it was Jake who stepped in, gently but firmly. No fighting. Just words. Words that worked. When a rumor about a teacher started spreading online, it was Jake who led a campaign to shut it down, defending the very institution he once disrespected. Redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about rewriting the future. That spring, Jefferson High held its annual Heroes Assembly, a long-standing tradition where one faculty member and one student were honored for exceptional courage and leadership. As the principal walked to the podium, students sat upright with anticipation. Whispers buzzed. Most already suspected who the faculty pick would be. But when he spoke, hearts swelled nonetheless. Our faculty honoree is someone whose strength redefined this school. Who taught us that courage doesn't always roar, it sometimes comes as a quiet, steady voice that says, try again tomorrow. Miss Alicia Carter, please join us. Alicia rose slowly. Applause thundered. But the real shock came moments later. The student honoree announcement. The principal cleared his throat. And this year, for the first time in Jefferson's history, our student award goes not to an athlete or a straight-A scholar, but to a young man who showed us that true strength lies in change. In facing your failures. In using your pain to build peace. Jake Matthews. Silence. Then a standing ovation. Alicia blinked back tears as Jake walked to the stage, his face stunned, then smiling. He hugged the principal awkwardly, waved at the crowd, and turned to Alicia. I wouldn't be here without you, he said quietly. You got here because you chose to be, she replied. That's all you. Later that evening, as Alicia walked through the now empty hallways, her heels echoing softly off the tile, she paused outside room 237, her classroom. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, on her desk, was a note. Written in careful, neat handwriting. Dear Miss Carter. You didn't just change the school. You changed the way I see myself. Thank you for seeing me before I saw me. Jessica, Marcus, Maria, Dylan, Ethan, and Jake. Alicia folded the note carefully and held it to her chest. This was why she stayed. Why she fought. Why she never walked away, even when every instinct screamed at her to run. Because sometimes, the strongest people in the room aren't the loudest. They're the ones who get knocked down, and still rise. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light through the school windows, Alicia Carter turned off the lights and walked out, not just as a teacher, but as a legend. In a world where bullying often goes unchecked, one teacher's courage changed everything. Alicia Carter didn't just fight back with fists, she built a legacy of strength, accountability, and redemption. This story reminds us that true power lies in using your voice, standing for what's right, and lifting others as you rise. Real strength is quiet, steady, and unstoppable when it's rooted in truth. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe to True Echo, leave a comment about a teacher or mentor who changed your life, and share this video to inspire someone else today.